Hey, welcome back, faithful politics listeners and watchers. I am your political host, Will Wright, and I'm joined by your faithful host, Pastor Josh Burtram. How's it going, Josh?
Doing great. Thanks, Will.
Hey, and this week we have with us returning guest, Josh Lewis. He is the host of the Saving Elephants podcast, a show dedicated to exploring the principles of conservatism in an ever-changing political landscape. And if there's anybody that I would ever want to talk to find out the state of conservative Republican politics, it would be this guy. So welcome back to the show, Josh.
It's great to be back with you guys. I think we started our podcasts collectively around the same time. I started in 2018, April Fool's Day 2018, about 7 years ago. So I'm not sure when you guys launched, but we've been on a similar trajectory ever since.
Yeah, it's been pretty nice. I like to say like I've been podcasting before podcasting became cool, but that's not true. Here's a trivia question though for you. Do you know the origins of the word podcast?
I don't know if I do, but I think it's a derivative from the original broadcast, meaning kind of to broadcast out like radio-wise. I can't remember what the pod stood for, though, but I know it had to do more directly.
iPod.
Okay, there you go. All right, well, I'm not nearly as cool as I thought I was.
No, you are still way cool because
Cool.
We are here today to just, I don't know, get a temperature check, a pulse on what the heck the Republican Party is up to. You've been a lifelong Republican, millennial Republican, if I recall. But before we get into that, how's the podcast going? What are you hearing from the folks that you're talking to?
Well, and I'm probably admittedly talking to a slice within the Republican/conservative movement because I am a proud, I'll call myself Trump skeptical or MAGA skeptical Republican. I don't go all in on the anti-Trumpism, but I have never voted for the guy, never intend to. From that group, it's a mixed bag, honestly. I think we're in this sort of the haze of a new administration, kind of a cautious optimism of, well, maybe some good things can come of this. Let's wait and see. To those who have years ago thrown in this house, said, nope, no good is ever going to come of this. I know I dig your Thanos for 2024 t-shirt. I'm not wearing my Sweet Meteor of Death for, I guess it was 2020 t-shirt. But there has been a sense of in the wilderness, if you will, for the traditional conservative the past many years, while also coupled with kind of a bizarre, but there are certain policy gains we can have. So it's an uncomfortable position to be in because the temptation, I think, is to go all in on this is all good, all bad. And instead, you kind of have to ride that line of, take the good with the bad and sort of differentiate between the two.
Yeah, I've been talking about this latest, Trump administration so far, like a couple things, right? I didn't vote for Trump in 2024 or in 2020, much to the chagrin of many people I know. And people are probably like, he's not a conservative. He didn't vote for Trump. And yeah, okay, whatever. That's fine. You can think whatever you want. But I feel like a little bit of a whiplash right now with this Trump administration, with everything. And I'm not a never Trumper because I did vote for him in 2016, number one. I wouldn't call myself a never Trumper because if I could be convinced, if someone could show me why we should vote for him or why these concerns that I've been hearing about are not correct, then like kind of his autocratic tendencies and the way, just this like almost like, again, breakneck whiplash decisions, then I would be okay with that. I haven't heard that yet. I haven't had anyone really tell me that. I've had the opposite, and it's felt more convincing to me. But, we have this sense in conservatism of prudence and caution, right? The belief that society, it should change gradually, it should change carefully, rather than through these sweeping revolutions. All the conservatives were up in arms. I can't believe this George Floyd and what's happening and all these riots and all. And yet it is Doge. Is this sweeping or is this slow and gradual? And I would just love to hear your thoughts on how are we doing as conservatives with prudence and caution these days?
Well, and I'm going to broaden that out just a hair and saying, how are we doing as a nation with prudence and caution? And I would say not very good. This is not a this is not a conservative problem. This is a human problem, if you will. Prudence is a difficult virtue to come by in politics and statescraft. One would like to think that conservatism, I take my cues from Edmund Burke, who said prudence was the god of this lower world. Aristotle thought that it was the chief political virtue. So did Russell Kirk. So did, I think, Irving Kristol said that. A lot of conservative forerunners have said very clearly prudence, caution is the right approach. Now, I want to be careful here because when I say prudence and caution, that doesn't mean we cultivate to mind a conservative has to be someone who's taciturn and just never willing to recognize, hey, sometimes haste is necessary. Sometimes it is. I think what it is a deference to the past traditions, trying to understand why were things done the way they were, rather than just a presumption that it was all a bunch of racist nonsense in the past, and therefore we can ignore everything people before us had to say. Also, a recognition that we're all in this together. By we, I mean our ancestors, ourselves, and then those who haven't been born yet. And that demands a certain prudence, because it's not just incumbent upon us to take what's ours, but to actually see this project through for future generations. So all that being said, because you raise a number of interesting issues there, but if I just focus on Doge for a minute, again, it's a mixed bag. I feel like I'm in this very peculiar position because on the one hand, I think it is undeniable that the federal government is large and bloated, and it does need some sort of a, dare I say, hatchet job in order to elicit the sort of changes necessary. That being said, I think what's missing, and you use the word prudence here, it is easy to tear something down, and good could come of that, because there are things worth deconstructing. What's difficult is to have a clear-sighted plan as to how we build something back up and how we sustain something over the long term. One of the main things about Doge that you'll notice is it is an executive function. Elon Musk is doing what he's doing not because he was elected, but because Donald Trump has empowered him to do so. And that's fine. Trump can do that. But binding, lasting change in this country that's actually transformative requires congressional debate and process, and it requires parties on both sides buying in. And you'll probably end up with a product that's a little bit more watered down than maybe what you would have hoped for, but it's lasting, and it actually has an impact on our life. I would say for all the good that Doge could potentially do, and there's a lot of harm they could do, I dare say I think a lot of it is window dressing, because it's not lasting change. It can't be lasting change. And maybe most importantly, we're talking about a thin slice of the federal expenditures. So long as politicians, left and right does this, Republicans, Democrats do this, ignore entitlement reforms, which is where the real, that's what's going to sink us financially, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. I'm not saying I'm against them. I'm just saying you have to focus on that. There are certain years, I think during the Obama era, where you could have literally eliminated the entire federal government and the U.S. military, and we still would have been running deficits just because of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. So long as politicians on both sides will not talk about that, I'm not really interested in what Doge comes up with in terms of like trying to actually get our fiscal house in order. Good could come of it. I'm all for it, but we're kind of ignoring the bigger problems. And that is a very imprudent approach, if you will.
Yeah, I think that's correct, and I agree with you. On Doge, one of the arguments that I keep hearing from folks that vote differently than I do is like, oh, you guys are all caring about Elon Musk, like, don't you care about government efficiency? And a lot of MAGA folks are trying to paint Democrats as kind of like, yeah, we are pro waste, fraud, and abuse. And when I don't think that's necessarily the right characterization of where Democrats are coming from. I think personally, like, I am very pro government efficiency. I mean, I'm a veteran, and I get most of my health care at a VA health center, and it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. And so, hey, if you can make my life better by making the government more efficient, I'm all for it. The problem is, like Elon is the wrong vehicle, kind of to your point, to take us to where we want to go, because number one, a lot of the stuff that he's posting on their government website per se that apparently is open now that folks can just upload stuff to, like a lot of the stuff that he's saying he's cut are these like cultural identity programs, like DEI, LGBTQ. Like, if the president has issues with those, it's his prerogative. But like, is that really waste, fraud, and abuse, or is it just stuff I don't really like? So I guess my question to you is, like, in your mind, like, what would be a good example of waste, fraud, and abuse that Elon or one of his minions can go after?
I'm in the audit industry. That's my day job. I actually work for the state of Oklahoma as an auditor. We're the good guys because we audit governments, not taxpayers such as yourself. And so I obviously am very interested in the reduction of waste, fraud, and abuse. However, I also recognize as an auditor, and this is a very sad statistic, but more fraud is caught by accident than by external auditors. The number one source of fraud being caught is somebody on the inside sort of reporting it, if you will. And so knowing that basic fact, we in the audit industry have had to recognize that we're not the first line of defense in reducing waste, fraud, and abuse. What we can do, however, is have a laser-like focus on what are the internal controls within an entity that would mitigate against fraud. In other words, not so much how do you catch it, but how do you prevent it? How do you disincentivize it? How do you make it to where you've empowered other people to do their role so that it's less likely to occur, and if it does occur, it's less large. So taking it from that standpoint, my temptation is not to give you specific examples, but rather to say, and here I'm speaking as a conservative, look, you're right. I have yet to meet a Democrat that says I am pro waste, fraud, and abuse. Nobody wants that other than maybe very tiny groups of people within the inside that are profiting from it, right? And that's not Republican or Democrat, that's just self-interest. I think the real question isn't are we pro or against it, it's what sort of systems lead to waste, fraud, and abuse. And again, from a conservative standpoint, I would say the first line of defense is to have a laser-like focus on what should the government do, and whatever it should do, let's do it well. Beyond that, the private sector or individuals acting in their own capacity maybe should be handling these sorts of things. That's not necessarily a solution to everything, but I think I would attack the problem backwards, not so much trying to deal with the government as it is and trying to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse, but trying to work with Congress what sort of things, and I'm talking about a departmental level, and I know this might be controversial, but aspects of the Department of Education or the Environmental Protection Agency, what ought they not to be doing that they're currently doing? I want to, the things they should do, let's fund that. Let's empower them to do it. But if we can collectively agree they ought not to do these things, well, let's remove those responsibilities, and inadvertently, I think we remove a lot more waste, fraud, and abuse in the process.
Yeah, I think as an auditor, you probably have a very informed insight on probably like how people are being wasteful, and I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on like what are some misperceptions you think people have about waste, fraud, and abuse that would make them better advocates for cleaning it up. Like for instance, I work with a lot of people that are on Social Security. I know that's an interest area for Doge, and I know that it is sort of littered with waste, fraud, and abuse. But kind of to your point, I think a lot of it is just process-based because it's really hard to get on Social Security. And maybe that's for good reason. But because of the difficulty of how hard it is, people don't want to get off of it because they had to hire a couple lawyers to kind of advocate for themselves and do all this, and now they're on it. You got a company that wants to offer them a full-time job. They're like, I'll take it, but I can only work certain amount of hours because I'll lose my Social Security. And then you're like, that's fine, I'll give you 40 hours a week. Nope, can't do it. And it makes sense because like you've got this low income person that's already had a hard time getting on Social Security because they've got some sort of thing going on in their life where they can't work full time. But if they could work full time, they don't want to do it because of the difficulty. And I'm not saying that applies to everybody, but I'm saying that that's been my experience talking to folks who have been on Social Security. So I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on that. And what are some other dysfunctions of our system that are kind of causing this?
Yeah, and you mentioned Social Security. I know people who, for health reasons, have been drawing Social Security and hope to have their health back and have made improvements, but feel stuck because their income and their health is unpredictable. So how do I just tell the federal government, hey, I don't need this anymore, and next month I do? and it's a relatively clunky system, if you will. And I think I think we have to have two things in mind simultaneously. One is a sort of continuous recognition that there are ways to make the present system better. Maybe there's ways to make it more responsive to individuals. The amount of input that goes into this system, though, to try to understand each individual specific need over a system that is necessarily generalized for all of us, because we don't have a generalized system, then that's rife for misappropriation and fraud and all kinds of prejudices, awarding one group rather than the other. So for understandable reasons, governments naturally want to commoditize everything. They want to break us all down to individual units that they can understand. Maybe they'll put us in groups, but I'm, a Caucasian male in my early 40s kind of thing. That's who I am. That's not really who I am. I'm far more complicated than that, and I need things that are that no government bureaucracy could ever anticipate. They could get better at it. They could maybe say, oh, wait, people with this skin tone need this. Maybe that's a weird way to approach it, because now I sound like I'm getting race-based on this.
It's okay. People with my skin tone need a lot more cocoa butter in their lives, right. So it's fine. You're good.
Yes, and less need of a tanning bed. So that being said, I guess one of the values I think conservatism has to offer us is it's very cautious to say there may not be solutions to problems, but there are trade-offs. And sometimes what we need in society is clear-eyed conversations about what exactly are we willing to live with and what aren't we. If we have a nationalized entitlement system, we're going to always have a certain level of these problems. I personally would rather have a different system. I would rather have something that's more free market-based. I would rather have something that's more up to the individual state, so that if Oklahoma screws it up, wherever you gentlemen are living currently, maybe you guys get it right. Maybe we can learn from you. I think there are other ways to do this. But that is the trade-off, right? If we do it individually, a lot of people are going to hurt. Maybe on whole more people would be better off, but some of us can't really count as, well, I can't look at the people in West Virginia harmed that much by federalizing this, if you will, and so therefore it needs to be nationalized. Well, that's a debate worth having. What I'm suggesting, though, is any system you develop is going to have its pros and cons. And I think one of the problems we have in this era is an inability. We want to nationalize everything, which is going to make most of us unhappy. And we want to pretend as if all problems have solutions, which is not right, although we continue to elect people that claim, hey, you put me in office and I will fix this problem. I think a bit more adult-like approach is to recognize nation of 300 plus million people, we probably need more variety. We probably need more options, and we probably need to countenance the way you do it in your state might be a little different than how I do it here, and that's okay, because we're trying to deal with the difficulties of life the best we know how at our individual levels. One of the advantages there, of course, is if what we're doing doesn't work out, it's a lot easier for me to fire my governor than to fire the entire United States Congress, right? Or it's a lot easier at a more local level for people to take responsibility and ownership for their successes or failures, and for us to grade them accordingly. When you nationalize everything, it's not only harder to do that, it's harder to even perceive whose fault something is, if you will.
So I love this idea of the trade-offs, and I'd like to dig into this a little bit more. Do you feel like this is a primarily conservative or primarily embraced among a conservative audience, or is it like and not, let's say, on the left or on a more liberal audience that maybe has this kind of different vision of what's possible? Like in this trade-offs, like it seems to me that trade-offs are just this is just a reality, that if you explained it, that people would accept it, or, oh, that makes sense. You have to have trade-offs. You can't do two things simultaneously. Even though we say we can't, we actually can. We actually can't. Multitasking is attention moving from one thing to the next. I mean, just trying to bring it very simply in the sense that I can't be doing what I'm doing right now on this podcast and also be having lunch with someone else or having, coffee with someone else simultaneously. There's a trade-off. There's a use of the time. Is this something that you think is understood And what do you think is so mysterious about this, or why is it so difficult for us as a nation to grasp this?
Gosh, that is a great question, but I need to ask you first. Have you read Thomas Sowell's A Conflict of Vision?
I absolutely, yeah, I have. I listened to it. Yep.
Okay, because it sounds like your question is coming sort of from that book.
I guess, yeah, now that you say it, you're like, yeah, it kind of is. You're right. I mean, it was a while ago, but yeah, I was a big fan of Thomas Sowell. I know he's been very debated and controversial, but I always appreciated his way of thinking.
He's one of the, not to get on a Thomas Sowell tangent, but he's one of the 4 individuals on the Mount Rushmore saving elephants conservatism, if you will. And the thing I think I'm the most impressed about him is his consistent ability to communicate incredibly complex ideas in a way that almost anybody can understand it. That's not a gift I possess and most people don't. But anyhow, getting off that, A Conflict of Visions is one of his earlier books, and it's really interesting because I don't think he even uses the words liberal, progressive, conservative in any of it. He refers to them as visions of the constrained or the unconstrained vision. And he talks about this almost innate in human nature, if you will. And this is one of the reasons I don't think we'll ever truly rid ourselves of the left-right debate. I don't want to say we're born this way in the sense that there is no ability to have conversations or even change across the political divide. But there's these sort of innate understandings of, well, what is human nature? What is our, in a lot of ways, we have been having this argument, maybe it predates this, but at least since the French Revolution. To what degree is human nature malleable? Can we change as a species? Can we truly solve things, say politically speaking, through social manipulations? What impact does that have? And to be fair, I don't think there's anyone that is 100% all in on either side of that equation. Obviously, politics can solve problems. Obviously, it can't solve all problems. I think that we're talking about an area of not so much extremes, but people that kind of lean to one side or the other. The unconstrained vision, this is what we might typically think of as the left, tends to take the view that problems are more solvable, that problems have solutions, that problems have, if we empower certain individuals to do certain things, we can actually achieve progress in some form. The constrained vision, which tends to be the more conservative, is not so much that problems aren't solvable, but that we don't necessarily have the tools needed as humans to do it collectively. That fixing this over here might cause something to go off wrong over here. Now, that's not the same as saying every step forward is an equal and opposite step backwards. It just means there's a recognition that maybe solutions isn't the best way, maybe progress isn't the best way to think of politics. Maybe society doesn't have a goal it's getting to. Maybe rather the purpose of politics is to create a level, a sustainable playing field so that we as individuals can imbue our lives with purpose and meaning and build on top of that. Now, these things being said, because I think Josh, the nature of your question is, I don't know that it's necessarily fair to say, like in today's political climate, that either Republican or Democrats are more or less guilty of this per se. I think conservatism going back is certainly more trade-off oriented. And part of this is, I don't want to get too far off base, but this might be helpful. I think both the progressive and the conservative have their own individual underlying virtues that animate them. For the progressive, in my opinion, it is justice. It is a sense of this is right and wrong. That can just be equality, but oftentimes it's more a sense of we want to empower people to do good things because that's right. We want to do good things. And that's not something that the conservative denies, but the animating virtue for the conservative is gratitude. It's an understanding that what we have is a good thing. Let's retain it. Let's try our best to hold on to it. And you can see how these fit into these sort of constrained, unconstrained worldviews. One is a tragic view, if you will. The conservative is a tragic view. It's let's just make sure things don't get worse, right? Because things could always get worse. The progressive tends to be I don't mean this as a pejorative, but a more utopian view. Almost an unfettered things not only could get better, but they ought to, and we ought to even be angry that they're not there already. And it's not so much in totality either those are right or wrong, but that is the tension, if you will, between the left and the right.
I am kind of curious, and I'm glad we're talking about this and values of political parties, because as much as I despise our duopoly in America, I recognize its value. Like I'm a Democrat. I believe the Democrat Party stands for social justice, progressing this country in a direction where everybody's equal and so on and so forth. And And like, so that's why I'm a Democrat, because I recognize that, like you have power when you find people that share similar like viewpoints with you, and you can vote and make change and whatnot. Republicans, same thing. So I'd love for you to explain in your mind, what does it mean to be a Republican, and what do the Republicans like, believe, what do they value, what do they think is important for this country? Because I was thinking to myself, like, if you were talking to a brand new citizen of this country who just raised their hand, swore, took the test that we would all fail, and became an actual legitimate citizen, and they were going to vote for the first time in their life, but haven't really, followed politics, and they're in a state where you have to register. I think there's like 30 some odd states where you have to register. Not in Virginia, by the way. And they're like, well, what party should I register for? Like well, what's your best argument for why Republican is the party they should register for?
I was wondering where the question was going to end up there. Wow, that's a good one. So my 1,000-foot view answer is, I'm podcast host of Saving Elephants. I'm a lifelong Republican. I am not unaware of the direction my party has gone, nor that I'm in the vast minority of its viewpoints, if you will. So I don't necessarily tout the party line in a lot of ways. I do, however, recognize that as a conservative over the long period of time, the Republican out of the two parties, the Republican Party, is the most likely to champion conservative policies in the long term. Even if there's a lot of ways in which they're currently championing, I would call them more nationalist populist, honestly, even in some sense, big government progressive policies, over the long term. And to be fair, it's not as if the Democratic Party has acted as a counterweight and says, okay, well, we'll become more moderated in the meanwhile. Maybe in rhetoric, but certainly not in policy. And so talking to an individual as a newcomer, like why they ought to, I'm trying to be cautious here, because I probably, if I'm talking to a brand new citizen of the United States who just does not know, and by the way, I'm reminded of a conversation I had years ago in an airport terminal with a woman from Germany who had very broken English at the time the Tea Party was new. And I was struggling with trying to explain to her why the Tea Party was not the same as a Democrat or Republican Party. And like, this is hard to do if you only have a few English words that we can share. But talking to someone who's brand new to the United States, and I know this might sound a little odd, I don't know that I would necessarily encourage them to join the Republican Party. Now, there might be certain individuals who are Republicans that would run. There are certainly values that I think that the Republican Party holds, or espouses, or claims to hold, that I would hope would win through. But again, a long-term view is such that I hope the Republican Party maintains a sense of its origins, honestly, dating all the way back to Lincoln. I'm not trying to get super nostalgic here, but sort of a clear-headed understanding of where exactly our rights come from, of how equality is balanced with consensual government, how both can be true and counterbalanced at the same time. And that from that, you can derive a very durable framework of something we can be proud of individual rights, that has honestly been one of the hallmark achievements of humanity of the past, I don't know, ever since we crawled out of the swamps, I suppose, and that is a more durable vision in the long term. Now, it remains to be seen, maybe 20, 30, 40 years from now, I might say, you know what? Maybe we've reunited the Whig Party, and we need to go with that. And part of the reason I'm saying that is because, well, where you started off here, I'm not a fan of the duopoly either, but it's a necessary evil almost in a sense. The way until we restructure the government, and I'm not even advising we do so, we're going to have two parties. If the Republican Party fell off the face of the earth, it would be replaced by something else. If the Republican Party split, one of those would eventually win out, or they would take over the Democrat. We're going to be stuck with two parties so long as our system maintains the way it does. That being said, the nature of the parties do evolve and change over time in their understanding. You know, what it means to be a Republican today is different than 20 years ago, let alone 200 years ago. Or I guess it would have been, there weren't too many Republicans 200 years, but you know what I mean. Yeah. Several generations back. So some of what you're talking about is the mechanism whereby we elect elected officials that comport certain coalitions or values. There is a stickiness to it in that you can trace through lines between Lincoln up until today. but it's also not a pure what the Republicans believed back then is identical to what they do today. Part of which because issues change. We can't have continuity of those same beliefs, and so my desire is to strengthen the Republican Party and to reinforce its conservative principles, so that someday when I'm meeting with that immigrant who has just become an American citizen, I can proudly say, here is exactly why I think you should join this party.
I really, really like that. And it's bringing to my mind this sense that, like, how important it is for us to separate ourselves from the parties that we've voted for, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I hear you say I'm a lifelong Republican, what I hear you say is that I've been a Republican my whole life, not necessarily I'm going to be a Republican for the rest of my life, right? Because say the Republican Party started becoming, which and some people may argue it already has, completely unmoored in some ways from some of its foundational principles or conservative principles. My assumption is that you and I would probably be like, ooh, this party is not my party anymore. And it's because Republican, Democrat, if you take the same thing, name it Democrat, name it Republican, right? It's what's being represented. Going back to this idea of this conflict of visions, it's the idea, it's almost like this view of reality. It's this view of like, what is reality like? What's going on? And it moves down to foundational assumptions about human nature, about the collective, not just an individual person's human nature, but how we act as a people, how we act as a collective. What happens when we all get together and we can't have maybe 300 million people can't have a conversation. It's impossible. And so what has to happen? Well, there's mechanisms that we use to spread ideas and things like that. And of course, they're going to get shifted and changed through these mechanisms of action that spread them. And I'm thinking, like, what are these principles? And I know we've talked about this, I think even last time you were on, but it's really worth revisiting. What are these things that, like, hey, here are the principles of conservatism that really represent reality as it is. In other words, why should Will become a conservative? Why should he think, and I mean that, or vice versa, right? Because if Will shouldn't become a conservative, then why are we conservatives? And,
sure.
and if we shouldn't become a liberal in Will's view, why is Will a liberal? Is it just willy-nilly, whatever feels good? Sometimes it feels like that for all of us, right? It's just whatever, oh, that feels right, that feels wrong. And maybe it does come to that. I'd love to get your thoughts, like, what's going on, conservatism, this view of reality at its core, that, and even maybe piggybacking on that, how are we doing as a Republican Party? Are we really keeping up those principles, do you think?
No, but neither party has truly kept up their principles ever. Though I dare say I think we're living in an era where we're far more breadth of people keeping up principles than what I have witnessed in the past, and would presume hopefully in the future will suit me different. And I appreciate you separating the problem, because there's a big difference between me talking to that immigrant about why they should become a Republican and me talking to Will about why you, sir, should be a conservative, right? That is because by nature, since we're talking about something that talks about ideas and human nature and the fundamental anthropology of who we are, and this is a conservative notion, of course, that doesn't change, or at least it doesn't change very much, or it changes extremely slowly. We're all going to be long dead before that. We're going to have very many, shall we say, truly innovative causes in morality or the nature of humans. And for that reason, I can, now sometimes words change, and you gentlemen know very well that you could have another guest on here next week called conservative. I think I was watching your second most watched podcast was Clay Clark. It's just weird that we're both called conservative.
Yes, I agree.
He lives not too far from me, by the way, and I've never met him, but I know people that know him, and he is an individual, to be sure. He's very, very entertaining, I'll put it that way. But the animating worldview, if you will, of conservatism is something that does not change. Now, it can respond differently to different data or input or process of time. As I often say, I am a conservative in a sense of the ideas of the American founding, not 17th century Ottoman Empire. those are two very different kinds of conservatism.
Yes,
What are we conserving?
yes.
And in fact, that's one of the things that makes us messy is conservatism, much like radicalism, is one of the very few contextual-based ideologies, because it's not enough to just say, I am a conservative. Well, a conservative of what? What are you trying to conserve? If you're a radical, in some ways I'm a radical. What am I trying to tear apart?
Right.
And people can swap. Some people can be radical about the very things I'm trying to conserve, or vice versa. But I think conservatism, properly understood, has a number of advantages to it. I think it consistently, and I am a Christian, Josh, so I don't want to get too terribly religious here, but there's some crossovers that I can't avoid. I think conservatism is the best shot we have at taking seriously Christ's command to render unto Caesar's that which is Caesar's, to God that which is God's. Which, if you think about from one standpoint, is like, I don't know how to. Isn't everything God's? Like, what is the dividing line there? But I think Christianity and conservatism as an underpinning frees us to consistently recognize the difference between the eternal and the immediate, the here and now. That Christianity does not disavow. I mean, this would be a heresy. It does not disavow the importance of the material world or the importance of establishing truth and justice in this material world, of feeding the poor, of helping those who are in need. It also simultaneously recognizes that this isn't the eternal. And so it frees the Christian to not be bogged down by some ideology that finds salvation in their politics, but instead consistently says, while politics is important, it is literally nothing more than an aspect of what is all of life. And I think when we break from this, we end up with the silliness we're in today, where it's hard to think of anything that's not political, whether it's football, whether it's social media. Everything is political. It ought not to be. There's a lot of things that politics does not need to intrude upon. It doesn't enrich our lives to make it all political. I think it was several years back when Colin Kaepernick was taking a knee, and that was the same year Kanye West was courting Donald Trump. Somebody posted to Twitter, weird takeaways from this year. The left gets football, the right gets Kanye. And I just thought, this is not the world I want to live in, right?
Yes.
What does any of this have to do with politics? But so I think that is one thing that conservatism can be helpful about, is it consistently focuses on the durable forms that provide our life meaning, the thick institutions that stand outside of politics. Politics is important. It obviously talks about politics, but if you really delve into the conservative intellectuals of old, they were just as concerned about the moral health and fabric of society. In fact, maybe you could even argue more so, that unless society was working, unless the individuals were governing themselves, there was no such thing as self-governance. And these things are all down, it's been maligned, I guess, by the Breitbart founder. Oh, good grief. It's not Steve Bannon. Who am I thinking of? It's
Andrew Breitbart.
Thank you. Yes, the dude with the name Breitbart, and I should have known that.
Some Breitbart guy?
Yeah, I'm much more a fan of Andrew than his predecessor, but he didn't invent the phrase, but he popularized it. The culture is downstream of politics, and I think he's absolutely right about that. Now, we can have a big argument, because I think the culture wars we're having are stupid, and the things we talk about considered to be culture aren't necessarily cultural, but it is a good idea that conservatism consistently focuses first on the non-political so that our politics can be durable and enriched.
So I have so many questions, and I'm trying to think about what direction I want to go given the time that we have. So let's just keep it kind of on the quasi-current. So Trump gets elected. Last time you and I talked, we had a different president. Trump's as the president now, and he has nominated a bunch of very controversial cabinet picks. Some of whom have worked at Fox News, and some have just been controversial because they're controversial. So two come to mind: RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard. They were confirmed. Every Republican senator voted for them except one, Mitch McConnell, which I'm not really scratching my head, because most politicians find their courage when they don't have to worry about a primary. Mm-hmm. But I'd love to get your thoughts about, like, what does this mean? I mean, Mitch McConnell is no resistor, and he's no progressive. So what's your take on that?
On Mitch McConnell specifically?
Mm-hmm.
McConnell's
what does it mean for the kind of the Republican Party when you have the stalwart of the Republican Party who has, managed to get all kinds of wins for conservatives?
Yeah, well, I certainly wouldn't call Gabbard and RFK a win for conservatives, but I understand what you mean. And McConnell is one of the most complex political figures of our time, I think. And granted, he's on his way out the door, but I think in some ways it's weird because he almost perfectly represents, in my mind, both the villain and also the actual prudent politician I would hope others would emulate. I mean, I think there is no denying the man is ridiculously talented. Yes. and has pushed forward things that most others in that position could have never done. And so from a purely talent standpoint, I think he is worth understanding and emulating to that degree. I think he is far more... This is what's weird, is I'm in this very odd minority who I'm not happy with the direction of the Republican Party. But I recognize there's a reason we got Donald Trump. And so my desire is not to return us to the George W. Bush, Mitch McConnell era, because that had its problems too. It had its establishment excesses that now we have sort of the populist excesses we're trying to rid us of. So there's a balance there. And I think in my mind, McConnell represents a lot of ways an improvement on the current model, but also sort of a throwback to a previous era that leads to the current model, leads to the dissatisfaction that eventually causes the populist right backlash. Because while it does have certain advantages and certainly knows how to run government, it does not seem to understand how to reach people where they're at and recognize. I mean, if you look at something as simple as immigration, it has such a wooden ear to what the actual experiences of the people on the ground are. And such an inability to break from the political power players, if you will, in the worlds of business and politics, that it consistently tells its base, shut up and get along, until the base eventually rises up and throws it out. With Gabbard in particular, and part of the reason I think McConnell is a very peculiar guy is because I think he does have certain underlying guiding principles, but they're muted. I think he is an extremely savvy, cunning politician. I would never confuse him with a man of high morals and high integrity, if you will.
Yeah.
But he does occasionally, I think, show a long-term view that is lacking in the Republican Party. And I think he recognizes the dangers in putting someone like Tulsi, which, to be clear, in some weird ways, I'm a fan of Tulsi Gabbard. She's very talented. She's very articulate. She holds certain views that I think are interesting. I think it's good the degree to which she would buck the Democratic system. I liked her better as a Democrat than a Republican because it seemed like she was doing more good for the Democratic Party to have sort of a fly in the ointment that they're having to contend with. And there may be some cabinet positions I wouldn't mind seeing her in, but not in the one she's got. Anybody that's even remotely courting the idea that Assad maybe wasn't all that bad of a guy needs to be nowhere near any American international, intelligence agencies.
Sure,
or at the very least needs to be compellingly able to explain to us why she has radically evolved from that position and why it was a mistake. And I do wonder if it's literally as simple as Mitch McConnell still has an ounce of integrity in his body. He's like, yeah, we can't put a person like that. I mean, and the other thing you could say of Mitch McConnell is, he's not winning MAGA awards. He's not. So it's not as if I think he's doing the right thing when it's hard all the time, but it's more of he's not going to, had he voted for Tulsi Gabbard, it's not as if everybody in MAGA said, oh, okay, I guess he's an okay guy. He was booed at the RNC as he was announcing, I'm going to nominate, Donald Trump. They're booing this guy. He knows that he's lost the base. He owes them nothing, and he's never going to get their affection back. And so I think that may explain in part why he did what he did.
So I got to ask the bombshell question, dude. Is Donald Trump a conservative? I would love for you to talk about Donald Trump. Is he a conservative? And really, what I'm actually really trying to get at is, what is the crux of the issue that you think like the most important issue that we're facing right now in conservatism, and how is Donald Trump going to help us or hinder us?
I'll answer that. Yeah. It's DEI. DEI is the most pressing issue facing the country.
Yeah, it's there's such a juxtaposition between what actually impacts our life and what animates us, because what we get to see we're so fortunate and prosperous in this country that we live our political lives as if it's all a big movie, right? And we just want to get the win, and we want, I mean, in a lot of ways, and I'll say this as a criticism. One of the things you can say of the Donald Trump cabinet is they look like they're made for television. This is arguably the most attractive cabinet we've had, at least in my lifetime, maybe ever. And I don't think that's an accident. I think it's more about the sizzle than the steak, if you will. To directly answer your question, Josh, no, Donald Trump is not a conservative. And I want to be clear, I don't mean that as a pejorative. I don't think by any strict definition of conservatism, Donald Trump would claim to be a conservative. Now, he will in certain circles because it's to his advantage. And if we're just talking about the stupid binary world of red team versus blue team, okay, I guess we could call him a conservative if everything gets divided, if all the complexities of human thought and life are divided into these two stupid camps. Sure, he's more team red than team blue. But at that point, we're just talking about, it's a sports jersey. It's not an actual deep intellectual understanding. I think there was one instance in his first term where he basically said, some people have called me a nationalist. I guess I'm a nationalist. And I wished he would have leaned into that, because I think that was probably closer. I think he's a nationalist populist. And I think maybe fair to say, I've often said, look, Trump has two abiding issues. One, immigration. Two is trade. He's been the same Donald Trump for the past 30, 40 years on those two issues. They've kind of molded a little bit due to the change in circumstances. He talks less about, say, Germany or Japan, if you will, and now it's more about China. Beyond that, I think he is essentially a populist demagogue. Again, I'm not trying to be just negative on the guy, but I think it's very clear he does not have a consistent ideological through line. And that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes the worst leaders in history have really consistent ideologies. Lenin, for example. Trump is all about Trump. He believes the problems are, and this is sort of a populist view, he believes the problems are simple. There are elites manipulating things and harming good people, the majority out there. There are the people who are behind me, and if they will empower me, I will throw out the elites and put in the right people who will do the right things, and all will be well. It's a needlessly simplistic view of how the world works, if you will. I've said before, I don't think he believes he can walk on water. I just think he thinks that foreign policy and trade is easy, and it just takes a person with a strong will doing the easy thing. In spite of all evidence to the contrary, I think he really believes that. All that being said, there are aspects in which we could call Donald Trump more conservative. I mean, certainly. One of the things this guy has the capacity to do is make the left go insane, and it's fascinating to me the degree to which they could just consistently take the bait. That if either party would just straighten up and act like adults for a long enough period of time, I think it would destroy the other party. But somehow Trump in the mix just blows everything out of the water. And so I guess for that reason, I would say maybe the ultimate Donald Trump is not a conservative is, as I mentioned earlier, I am a conservative in the sense I desire to conserve the ideas of the founders. Not all of them, obviously. They had some bad ideas. But as far as the system of government, their anthropology, and their understanding of human nature, I don't believe we improve upon that. I think we can build from it, but I don't think we get a better version of what it means to be human. In that sense, I am a conservative. In the sense of Donald Trump, he is by definition a radical. He does not desire to hold within the strict contours of the rules of law. The question is, how do I use this system to advance the principles I want to advance? Not how do I protect the system so that when the next guy gets in office, he can't use it against the American people.
Gosh, that's really good, and I wish we had like another hour to chit chat, because I have so many comments and so many questions. I mean, we haven't even talked about the 4.5 trillion and all that. So, love to have you back on.
Yeah.
Maybe we can dissect, trickle down economics and taxes. And my guess is, whether it's reconciliation or, one big bill, I predict that the government will probably shut down here in the middle of March. So we'll all have some extra time to chit chat about what it means to be a Republican. But thanks so much for stopping by, Josh. Really appreciate this conversation.
Yes.
When does your show come out?
Episodes on my podcast, well, they drop every first and third Tuesday of the month. Occasionally I'll throw some more out there because I'll have some sort of cross-partisan chats I try to get out there. But I try to do an original episode every Tuesday, every first and third Tuesday.
Okay, cool. You have a website?
Yes, savingelephants.blog.com.
Gotcha.
There are way too many people trying to save elephants for me to get savingelephants.com.
I know you're like, wow, he really is serious about saving. Oh, okay, this isn't the right website. Thanks again, Josh, for everything. This has been pretty fantastic. Saving Elephants podcast. You all make sure you check it out if you want more of the conservative perspective of what's happening in the country. And hey, to our audience and listeners, thanks again for stopping by, and always keep your conversations not right or left, but up, and we'll see you next time. Take care.